If you ever think you've seen the absolute peak of human arrogance, let me introduce you to the time my neighborhood decided that my private property was actually a communal storage unit for their incompetence. You know that feeling when you wake up, coffee in hand, expecting a quiet morning, only to look out your window and see a construction crew erecting a massive eyesore of a metal tower right in the middle of your field? I nearly choked on my dark roast. And honestly, that was the moment I realized my life was about to become a very expensive, very petty, and incredibly satisfying game of legal chess. I've always been the type to keep to myself. I bought those few acres on the edge of the subdivision specifically for the silence, but apparently the universe, or more specifically the Homeowners Association Board, had different plans. I marched out there, boots hitting the dirt with enough force to kick up a small dust storm, ready to absolutely light into the foreman. He just looked at me with that blank, "I'm just doing my job," stare, and handed me a work order. And there was, signed in bold, loopy, infuriating ink, the name of our HOA president. Let's just call her Brenda, because frankly, the stereotype fits so, well, it's almost poetic. I didn't even wait for the coffee to kick in. I stormed over to her house, which, by the way, serves as the official HOA office, because why spend money on a real office when you can just turn your dining room into a fortress of bureaucratic misery? I burst in, ready to demand they tear that monstrosity down by sunset. Brenda just sat there, sipping tea like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac, giving me that smug, thin-lipped smile that makes you want to see if you can actually boil over. She calmly explained that the board had voted, without me, mind you, to approve this cell tower because our neighborhood had subpar reception. She actually had the audacity to cite a clause in the bylaws about necessary improvements on adjacent properties for the benefit of the community. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your field is adjacent, and this is for the greater good." The greater good, right? Because nothing says greater good like hijacking someone's land for a corporate telecom project. I told her she was out of her mind, that private property rights weren't just a suggestion, but she just waved a hand at me and said the decision was final and the construction was full steam ahead. I walked out of that house feeling like an absolute fool, powerless, angry, and honestly just gutted. I went home and spent the next few days watching that steel skeleton rise higher and higher, mocking me from my own backyard. Every time that drill whined, my blood pressure spiked. I was ready to call a lawyer and burn my savings, but then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. See, a few years back, my accountant, a guy I owe a lifetime of drinks to, had suggested I move the deed of that specific parcel into a limited liability company. It was just a tax maneuver, something I didn't think twice about, but there it was. The land wasn't owned by me as a person anymore. It was owned by the LLC, and in the eyes of the law, that made all the difference in the world. I didn't scream, I didn't call the cops, and I didn't try to stop the construction. I just sat back, watched them finish, and waited for the last guy to pack up his gear. I spent the next 2 days drafting the most beautiful, professional, and cold-blooded document of my life. I put on the company letterhead, laid out the lease terms, and sent an invoice addressed to the HOA. Land lease for telecommunications tower. I wrote, first month's rent, $5,000. I dropped it in her mailbox with a smile that would have terrified Shark. The phone call came exactly an hour later. Brenda wasn't just mad. She was screaming so loud the phone sounded like it was vibrating. She was rambling about how I couldn't do this, how they had the authority, how it was being difficult. I just waited for her to run out of air, took a slow breath, and said, "Brenda, you're right. The bylaws allow you to improve adjacent property. But you didn't build on my personal land. You trespassed on corporate property, and my company doesn't answer to your board." The silence that followed was sweeter than any music I've ever heard. You could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized she'd just handed a private company a blank check. She sputtered, threatened to call her lawyer, and slammed the phone down. I knew she'd call that lawyer, and I knew exactly what he'd tell her. "You screwed up, and you're on the hook." The next week was absolute chaos for them. I heard from a neighbor that they had to hold an emergency meeting, and let's just say it wasn't a peaceful tea party. Turns out, when you build a massive structure on land owned by a corporation that has zero interest in your greater good, you don't get to cite your little neighborhood bylaws. They were caught dead to rights. They had two choices: pay my company's rent or pay a fortune to have the tower dismantled and pay damages for the land. They chose the check, and it's been coming in every single month like clockwork ever since. They tried to negotiate, of course, tried to tell me the rate was unfair. I just told them that market fluctuations were a funny thing, and actually, I'd be implementing a 10% increase annually to account for the inconvenience of having their equipment on my site. They had no choice but to sign it. Now, that ugly metal tower I used to hate, it's basically my personal ATM. I sit on my porch, watch the sunset, and think about how they're funding my travel habits. It's glorious. It makes you think, doesn't it? We're all told that you have to play by the rules, that you have to respect the system, but sometimes the system is just a bunch of people like Brenda who rely on you not knowing your own rights. So, tell me, do you think I was being too petty, or is this just the kind of justice the world needs more of? Have you ever had some power-tripping HOA or a neighbor try to steamroll you, only to have it blow up in their face? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your stories. Let's see who's had the best "I told you so" moment. And hey, if you like seeing people get what's coming to them, make sure to hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more where this came from.